Celeste Marlowe did not raise her voice. That was the worst part. She simply looked at Alara Quinn standing at the edge of Lincoln Park's main path with two small boys pressed against her legs and smiled the way a woman smiles when she has already won every room she's ever walked into. Then she reached into her coat pocket, removed a slim white envelope, and held it out between two fingers like it was something mildly distasteful. "Take it," Celeste said. "There's enough in there to relocate. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere nobody knows your name or theirs." Alara didn't move. "You came here with children," Celeste continued, still smiling, dropping her voice to something almost gentle. "That tells me you're practical. Practical women take the money." One of the boys, the one with the slightly rounder face, the one who hadn't stopped watching the tall man standing 20 feet away, tugged at Alara's sleeve and whispered something she couldn't answer. Dante Vescari stood completely still. He was looking at his sons for only the second time in his life, and his fiancée was trying to pay their mother to disappear. If you were standing in that park right now, if those were your children, if that was your past, if the person you once trusted with everything was holding an envelope of cash and calling it mercy, what would you do? This is the story of what happened when Alara Quinn refused to take the money, and what it cost every single person standing in that circle. If this kind of story keeps you up at night, the kind with real consequences and no easy answers, hit subscribe and come along for every part. Drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if it moves you, leave a like. It means more than you know. Now, let's go back to where it actually started. The morning Dante Vescari walked back into Alara Quinn's life. She was running 7 minutes late and had syrup on her sleeve. That was the unglamorous truth of it. No premonition, no cold feeling in her chest, no strange stillness in the air the way they described it in the kinds of novels she used to read before Nico and Adrian made reading anything longer than a grocery list feel like a distant luxury. She was just late because Adrian had refused to put on his shoes and then cried when she put them on for him, and Nico had spilled half a container of maple syrup, reaching for it himself because he didn't want to ask, because at 4 years old he had already decided that asking for help was something he shouldn't need to do. She didn't know where he'd learned that. She knew exactly where he'd learned that. The park was crowded for a Thursday. October in Chicago had finally remembered it was October. The trees were doing their thing. The air had that particular sharpness that made everything feel slightly more significant than it probably was, and every person with a stroller or a dog or a camera seemed to have decided that Lincoln Park was the only place worth being. Alara had one twin's hand in each of hers and was navigating the main path the way she navigated most things these days, by putting her head down and moving forward with absolute commitment to not stopping. Nico pulled left, Adrian pulled right. She held on. "Mommy, that man is staring at us," Adrian said. Alara didn't look up. "Lots of people are out today, baby. Not at us. At me and Nico." "He keeps staring." She looked up, and the world did that thing it does in the moments, right before everything changes. It went a half-second quiet, the way it does when your body understands something your brain is still working through. Dante Vescari stood 20 feet away on the path. He was wearing a dark coat she didn't recognize over a charcoal suit she would have recognized in her sleep. He was thinner than she remembered, or maybe it was just the angle, the 3 years, the fact she had spent considerable energy over those 3 years, training herself to remember him as a smaller person. He hadn't succeeded. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had never in his adult life been anything other than the most powerful person in any room he occupied, standing in an open park in autumn, and somehow still radiating that same oppressive gravity that had once made Alara feel, foolishly, like standing close to him was the safest place she'd ever been. Beside him was a woman, tall, dark-haired, polished in the specific way that required effort to look effortless. She was saying something to Dante, her hand resting on his arm, not noticing yet that he had stopped listening. "Adrian said, Daddy," he said it quietly, almost to himself, like a word he'd been carrying around and finally found a use for. Alara felt the sound hit her somewhere below her ribs. Dante heard it from 20 feet away. She watched it land on him, watched his jaw lock, watched something shift behind his eyes, watched him process the word and its source and everything that word implied in the span of about 2 seconds. He was always fast at processing. She'd found that attractive once. Found a lot of things attractive once. The woman beside him, Celeste, Alara, would learn her name later, would learn a great deal about her, later turned to look at what Dante was staring at. Her eyes moved from Alara to the twins and back to Dante, and the temperature of her expression changed in a way that was subtle and exact. The way expensive things broke, cleanly, with no rough edges. Lara did what her body decided before her mind caught up. She pulled both boys behind her, turned, and walked. Alara, his voice. Same register, same controlled quiet. She'd once been able to tell his moods by the way he said a single syllable. She didn't need that skill anymore. She kept walking. Alara, stop. Don't, she said without turning around. It came out steadier than she expected. She was grateful for that. She heard his footsteps, measured, deliberate. He never ran. Running would have implied urgency, and Dante Vescari's operating posture in every situation was the same. I have time, because I control the timeline. She hated that about him. She had also once found it steadying. I just need to talk to you. You needed to talk to me 3 years ago. She turned the corner onto a smaller path and moved faster, Nico and Adrian half-trotting to keep up. He chose not to. She could feel him behind her, close but not grabbing her arm, because whatever else Dante was, he wasn't that kind of man. He understood exactly how much of his power came from restraint. The boys don't. She stopped walking. She turned around. His face was 6 feet from hers, and she stood and let herself look at it, because she was done flinching. Don't say anything about the boys. They're mine. He said it without accusation. Just statement of fact, the way he stated everything. They're mine, Alara said. You don't get a claim on something you didn't know existed because you disappeared. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Guilt was too simple for it. Something more expensive, more complicated. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't know. You want to understand why. She kept her voice low, kept it flat, because you left. You made that decision. Everything that came after is downstream of that decision, Dante. You don't get to show up in a park 3 years later and renegotiate. I'm not trying to renegotiate. Then what are you doing? He looked past her shoulder at the boys. She didn't turn to look at them. She kept her eyes on his face. I need you to listen to me, he said. Not because of the past, because of right now. There's something happening that you don't know about, and it's not safe. We're fine. You're not. We've been fine for 3 years without your assessment of our safety. Alara, his voice dropped, just slightly, just enough that she knew, despite everything she'd built against knowing his signals, that he meant it. That whatever this was, it wasn't performance. Someone knows the boys exist. Someone who should never know. She held his eyes for a moment. What do you mean? I mean photographs. Of you and the boys. That's on my desk. Left there by someone in my organization who wants me to understand that I can be touched through you. He paused. Which means they also understand they can touch you through me. And you don't have any idea that's in motion. Alara stood very still. She'd built the last 3 years on being careful. On being smart. On creating a life in Chicago under a name that was almost hers. Alara Quinn had been her mother's maiden name. And she'd gone back to it after leaving Dante. After leaving everything. And she'd been careful about addresses and records. And who she talked to. She'd been so careful that she'd started to believe careful was enough. She looked down at Adrian, who was watching Dante with open, complicated curiosity. Adrian always looked at everything with complicated curiosity. Nico was looking at the ground. We're not talking about this here, she said. Agreed. And I'm not going anywhere with you. Also agreed. He pulled a card from his coat pocket. Plain white single phone number. Call me tonight, please. She didn't take the card right away. Let it sit there between his fingers while she thought. Then she took it. That's not agreement, she said. That's me not throwing it in the trash in front of you. Something that might have been the ghost of something that had once been humor moved across his face. Then it was gone. He stepped back, nodded once. She turned and walked away with her sons. She did not call him that night. She lay in bed in her apartment on North Clark 3rd floor. Lise and Quinn, one dead bolt and one chain, and a sense of safety she now understood, was partially manufactured, and she held the card and looked at the ceiling and thought about the way Adrian had said that word. Daddy. Like it was something he'd always had filed away, waiting for the right object. She thought about photographs. She thought about someone in Dante Vescari's world finding her, tracking her, building a file on 2 4-year-old boys for use as leverage. She didn't sleep. She called at 6:45 in the morning. He answered before the second ring. There's a cafe on Armitage, she said. Corner table. I have an hour before they wake up, and I need to be back. I'll be there. And she paused. Come alone. I was going to. She hung up. The cafe was the kind of place that existed in every neighborhood, and was essential to none of them worn tile floor, mismatched chairs, a pastry case, with things that looked better than they tasted. Alara arrived 8 minutes early, and positioned herself with her back to the wall, and a clear line to both the front door and the hallway to the restrooms. Old habit. She'd developed a lot of old habits in the last 3 years that she'd never consciously decided to develop. Dante arrived exactly on time, which was itself a kind of power move. She noticed he'd changed his coat. She noticed she'd noticed. He sat down across from her. A server came immediately. People always came to Dante immediately. It was one of those ambient effects he had on a room, and he ordered coffee without looking at the menu. She already had tea. Her hands were wrapped around the mug, and she was not going to let them shake. "Tell me what you know," she said. He told her. It took 20 minutes, and it was worse than she'd braced for. Not dramatically worse, not movie worse, but the specific real-world worse that came from understanding the actual mechanics of a threat. Photographs spanning 4 weeks, shot from distance with a telephoto lens. Nico and Adrian at their preschool. At the park. At the corner store 2 blocks from their building that Alara visited every Sunday morning. Someone had been following them long enough to map their routine. She kept her face even while he talked. She had practice. "How many people in your organization could have done this?" she said when he finished. "Several. Which is why I can't move on it yet without knowing who specifically." "So you're telling me that someone in your organization, someone with access to your life and your desk and your security knows about my boys, and you don't know who?" "Yes." "That's not comforting, Dante. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to inform you so you can make actual decisions." She looked at him. "What kind of decisions are you expecting me to make? I want to put people on your building. Discreet. You wouldn't see them, but they'd be there." "Absolutely not." "I'm not having your men outside my door. I'm not bringing your world into theirs." "No." She shook her head. "I survived 3 years without your infrastructure. I'll figure this out." "You didn't know about the surveillance 3 years ago either." He said it carefully, without sharpness, which almost made it worse. She felt something move through her that she refused to let out. "Don't. I'm not attacking you. I'm saying that not knowing something was happening wasn't a failure then, and it's not one now. But you know now. That changes what you can do." She stared at the table. The tea had gone lukewarm. "What happened?" she said. 3 years ago." Why? The shift in his expression was small but real. He hadn't expected her to ask that here, at 6 in the morning in a cafe on Armitage, after 3 years. "Your father," he said, "and your brother. Someone in a competing organization found out they were connected to you, and through you to me. They were building toward using your family as leverage against me." He held her eyes. "The calculation I made was that the most effective way to remove you from danger was to make you hate me, to make you leave, to make you completely credibly gone from my life." The cafe sounds continued around them. Someone behind the counter dropped something. A man at the next table laughed at his phone. "That's the most arrogant thing I've ever heard," Alara said. "Probably," you decided, on your own, without asking me, that the best way to protect me was to destroy what we had and let me believe you'd chosen someone else. "Yes, and it didn't occur to you to tell me the truth and let me make that decision. If you'd known the truth, you would have stayed. And if you'd stayed, you don't know what I would have done. I know what you would have done." He said it quietly. "You would have stayed." She looked away, out the window. Cyclists on Armitage, the early ones, the ones who treated October like a personal challenge. He wasn't wrong, and they both knew it, which made her angrier, not less. "I was pregnant," she said, still looking at the window. The silence that followed had weight. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't." She turned back. "I'm not telling you to accuse you. I'm telling you so you understand what your calculation cost. I had no one. My family didn't know. I delivered Nico and Adrian in a hospital in Cincinnati with a midwife I'd found on a referral and a neighbor from my building sitting in the waiting room because I refused to be completely alone." She paused. "I learned to diaper twins by watching videos on my phone at 2 in the morning. I learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep and whatever was in my refrigerator. I worked from home. I kept us hidden. I did all of that." She met his eyes. Without you, Dante's jaw was set. His hands, flat on the table, were very still. "I know," he said. "You don't know. You're just saying it because you understand it's what needs to be said. That's not—" He stopped. Started again. "You're right that I can't know the specific weight of it. I can't." A pause, "But I understand what I cost you, both in what I thought I was doing and in what I didn't know I was doing. Understanding it and knowing it aren't the same thing, Dante. No, they're not." She picked up her tea, found it cold, set it back down. "I'm not doing this for forgiveness or for a conversation about the past. That's not what this morning is. I'm here because my sons might be in danger, and I need to understand the shape of it. Okay, so what do you actually propose right now? Elevating your awareness, varying your routes, your schedule. Not eliminating routines entirely. That's impossible with children, and it creates its own visibility, but not being predictable about timing. I know basic security, Dante. I know you do. What else? I'm going to find who's doing this internally. And when I do, he stopped. When you do, what? I'll handle it. Handle it meaning what? He met her eyes, meaning it won't be a problem anymore. She held his gaze for a moment. She'd once been able to tell herself she didn't understand what that meant, that she could maintain a comfortable vagueness about what Dante Vescari's solutions looked like. She wasn't 26 anymore. I don't want to know the specifics, she said. I know. And I don't want the boys to know any of this. Agreed. And if I decide that the risk is too high and I need to move, tell me before you do. His voice was level, but there was something under it. Please. She looked at him. Really looked at him. At the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. At the way he held himself with the same control, but at slightly more cost than she remembered. You missed 3 years, she said. Yes. Of them learning to walk and talk and have opinions about everything. Adrian argues with his cereal. Nico took apart a toy clock at age 3, trying to understand how it worked. Something broke slightly in his face. Just slightly. I know, he said. I know that. You should know it fully. Not as a fact, as a loss, because it is. He nodded. Once. She stood, put on her coat, picked up her bag. I'll call you if the situation changes or if I notice anything, she said. Don't contact me first. Don't come near the building. Don't approach the boys, Alara. Those are my terms, Dante. For right now, those are my terms. Take them or don't. He took them. She walked out of the cafe into the October morning and called her sitter to check on the boys and then stood on the sidewalk for 40 seconds breathing the cold air before she trusted herself to drive. She drove home. Nico was up and had gotten himself breakfast, which meant there was cereal on 3 surfaces and the milk had been left out. Adrian was still asleep, buried under his blanket with 1 sock on and 1 sock off, the way he woke up every single morning, inexplicably. She sat on the edge of his bed and watched him breathe. She thought about a man sitting in a cafe on Armitage with cold coffee, carrying the weight of information about his own sons as leverage, understanding for the first time the full accounting of what his decisions had built. She thought about photographs taken from a distance, mapped routines, someone inside Dante's world running a long and patient game. She thought about the envelope that Celeste Marlowe, the fiancée, the woman in the park, had handed her that afternoon when Dante had stepped away to take a call. The envelope Alara hadn't mentioned in the cafe. The envelope she'd taken out of her coat pocket twice last night, and both times put back without opening. Practical women take the money, Celeste had said. Alara looked at her son's sleeping face, the dark lashes, the jaw that was, despite everything, unmistakably his father's. She wasn't practical, she was something else entirely. She pulled the envelope out of her pocket and tore it in half without opening it and put it in the wastebasket beside Adrian's nightstand. Then she went to make the boys breakfast. Outside her window, on the street below, a man in a navy jacket turned up his collar and walked slowly to the corner and stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching the building. He had been there since 5 that morning. Alara did not see him. Could not see him for 11 more days. By then, everything would already be different. Marcus Vale had known Dante Vescari for 22 years. He had been there when Dante's father handed the organization to his son, not warmly, not with ceremony, but with the particular cold efficiency of a man who treated power as asset transfer. He had been there through the consolidation years, through the alliances and the breaks, through the moment Dante became not just powerful, but feared. Marcus had built his own position inside that structure with patience and intelligence, and he had never made the mistake of wanting what Dante had. He had simply wanted what Dante had promised would eventually be his. That promise made 12 years ago over bourbon, in a back room in River North, had never been put in writing. It hadn't needed to be. Between men in their world, certain things were understood. What Marcus understood now, watching the timestamp on the most recent photograph of Alara Quinn and the twins, was that Dante's unexpected and complicated reconnection with his former fiancée created a variable Marcus had not fully planned for. He had not expected Dante to feel it this way. He had expected guilt, maybe obligation. He had expected Dai to process the existence of the twins the way he processed everything analytically, at a distance, making the most rational available decision. He had not expected Dante to sit in a cafe for 20 minutes, with his hands flat on the table, listening. Marcus set down the photograph. He picked up his phone. There were decisions that, once made, reorganized everything around them. Marcus had made his some time ago. What was happening now was simply execution. He dialed. When the call connected, he didn't speak immediately. He let the silence do what silence did. Then, accelerate the timeline. He hung up. Outside his window, Chicago moved at its morning pace, indifferent and vast, knowing nothing about the machinery of consequence beginning to turn beneath its surface. Dante, 20 blocks away, sat in the empty cafe after Alara left and looked at the door for a long time. Then he took out his own phone and made a call. "I need everything you have on Marcus Vale," he said, going back 10 years. "Every account, every contact, every meeting I wasn't in." A pause on the other end. "Everything," Dante repeated. Then he too hung up. The cafe moved around him. The server refilled his coffee without being asked. A couple came in and took the table by the window, laughing about something. The pastry case turned slowly, offering its improbable goods. Dante Vescari sat with his cold coffee and thought about his sons, who he had spoken to exactly 0 words, who knew his face from a park and had said a single word that had disassembled something inside him, that he had not known was still capable of being disassembled. He thought about the man in his organization who was running photographs of those boys to a desk. He thought about what he was going to find when he started pulling the thread. He thought about the fact that he already knew, somewhere below the level of certainty, that it was going to be bad. He left the cafe. He had work to do. The man in the navy jacket was named Rourke. Alara didn't know that yet. She wouldn't know it for 11 days, and when she found out, she would feel 2 things simultaneously: relief that he was Dante's and not someone else's, and a cold, specific fury that Dante had broken his word inside of 48 hours. But that was 11 days away. For now, Rourke stood on the corner of North Clark and held a paper coffee cup that had been empty since 7 and watched the 3rd-floor windows of a beige brick building and reported nothing because there was nothing to report. The woman was home. The boys were home. The street was ordinary. He checked in every 2 hours with a single text, clear. Dante read each one and went back to work. The work in those first days was archaeology. He had a man named Solus Compact, precise, the kind of person who made spreadsheets feel like weapons go back through 10 years of Marcus Vale's internal communications, financial routing, and meeting logs. Not the official ones. The ones that existed in the margins of the official ones, in the gaps between documented meetings, in the pattern of what Marcus had chosen not to put in writing, and the few times he'd slipped and left a trace anyway. Solus came back on the 3rd day with a folder and a look on his face that said he wished he hadn't found what he'd found. "Talk," Dante said. "There are payments," Solus said, going back 6 years, small enough to move through operational expenses without flagging. Routing through 3 different shells before they land, he opened the folder on Dante's desk. They land with a holding company in Delaware that, when you trace it far enough, connects to Gregor Vasic. The name sat in the room. Gregor Vasic ran the organization that had, 6 years ago, been quietly building toward using Alara's family as leverage. The organization Dante had spent considerable energy neutralizing. The organization he had believed was neutralized. "You're sure?" Dante said. 3 separate payment chains, all routing the same way. The earliest one is from 6 years ago, 2 months before you ended things with Alara Quinn. Dante looked at the papers without touching them. "Marcus was talking to Vasic before I broke off the engagement," he said. "That's what it looks like." Which means he knew about the threat to Alara's family before I did. Solis said nothing. He didn't need to. Dante sat back. He thought about the conversation 6 years ago, when Marcus had come to him with the intelligence about Alara's family, the threat, the leverage being built, the calculation that Alara needed to be removed from Dante's life to be kept safe. He thought about how clean that intelligence had been, how actionable, how it had arrived with exactly the shape needed to produce exactly the decision Dante had made. He thought about what it meant that Marcus had been on Vasic's payroll before any of that happened. "Who else knows you ran this?" Dante said. "Nobody. Keep it that way. Everything you found goes to no one. No copies outside this room." Under Solus, Dante met his eyes. "If Marcus asks you anything about anything, you come to me before you answer." Solus picked up the folder and left. Dante sat in his office for a long time after that. The thing about Betrayal, real Betrayal, not the movie's version of it, was that it rarely felt dramatic in the first moment. The first moment felt like arithmetic. Like standing in front of a sum that had always been wrong, and finally finding the error, and the error being something so fundamental that you had to recompute everything you thought you knew from the beginning. Marcus had been feeding intelligence to Dante's enemy for 6 years, which meant the threat to Alara had not been something Marcus discovered and brought to Dante. It was something Marcus had helped construct. Dante made himself sit with that, made himself trace it through without flinching. Marcus had engineered the conditions that forced Dante to end things with Alara, had then watched, had known that Alara left Chicago pregnant, and had said nothing, because the existence of Dante's children was useful information to hold in reserve, had spent 3 years waiting for the right moment to introduce those children as leverage. The photographs on the desk hadn't been a threat from an unknown source. They'd been Marcus announcing himself, patiently, precisely, in a language designed to make Dante understand the terms without ever having to state them openly. Dante understood the terms. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "Dinner," Dante said when Marcus answered. "Thursday. The usual place." "Of course," Marcus said, warm, easy, exactly as he always was. "Everything all right?" "Just some things to talk through. Organization business. I'll be there." Dante hung up. He needed 4 more days of information before Thursday. 4 days to understand the full shape of what Marcus had built before he sat across from him and let Marcus believe he was still in control of the room. He was good at letting people believe that. It was one of the things Marcus had taught him. On the 5th day, Alara noticed the man on the corner. She noticed him the way you notice something that's been at the edge of your vision long enough to finally pull focus suddenly, completely, with the feeling that you should have noticed much sooner. Navy jacket, paper coffee cup, always empty looking. Same corner, always the same corner, but at different times so it wasn't immediately clockwork. She put Nico and Adrian in front of a cartoon they'd seen 12 times and called Dante. He answered on the 2nd ring. "The man on the corner of my street," she said. "Navy jacket. Who is he?" A pause that told her everything before he spoke. "His name is Rourke. He's mine. He's been there since the morning after our cafe conversation." "Yes." She breathed carefully. In through the nose, hold it, out. She'd learned that from a therapist she'd seen briefly when the twins were 18 months old and she was running on nothing and starting to feel it structurally. "I told you not to do that," she said. "I know. I told you specifically. Those were my terms, Dante. I said don't come near the building." "He's not near the building. He's on the corner, and I was never going to leave you unprotected after what I told you. That is not your decision. Someone in my organization has photographs of your sons. It is absolutely my decision." She felt the anger come up hot and specific. "No, it is not. You don't get to make decisions about my life. That's the whole point. That's been the whole point for 3 years. You made a decision about my life without asking me, and you are standing in your office right now making another one and calling it protection. It is protection. It's control, Dante. Those are not the same thing." Her voice was still low, still even. In the next room, Adrian laughed at something on the television. She moved further down the hallway. "You know what the difference is? Protection is something you offer, something the person can choose. What you did is something you imposed, without asking, after I explicitly told you not to. And if something had happened to them while Rourke wasn't there, then that would be on the person who's making threats, not on me for not accepting your unauthorized surveillance of my home." Silence. "You want me to pull him?" Dante said. "Yes. I'm not going to do that." She laughed. It came out sharp and short. "Of course you're not. I can't. Not right now. Not with what I'm still finding out about who's behind this and how deep it goes." He paused. "Give me until the end of next week. If the situation is resolved, Rourke goes. If it's not resolved, we renegotiate. We don't renegotiate. You don't negotiate with me and then break the agreement and then offer to negotiate again and call it fair. I know it's not fair. Then what do you want from me, Dante? What is it that you're actually asking for right now?" The pause was longer this time. "I don't know," he said. "I don't have a clean answer for that." She stood in her hallway and looked at the twins' artwork taped to the wall, Nico's careful geometric shapes, Adrian's explosive color without much form, and let the silence breathe. "1 week," she said finally, "and then we talk again. And if you break something I say in that conversation, I take the boys and I go somewhere you won't find us. Are we clear?" "Yes, I mean it. I know you do." She hung up. She stood there for another moment. Then she went and sat on the couch between her boys and watched the cartoon she'd seen 12 times and let Adrian lean against her arm and felt the specific weight of him, the warmth and the small reality of him, and breathed. Celeste Marlowe was not a woman who asked questions she didn't already have partial answers to. She had been with Dante for 14 months. She had understood, going in, the nature of what she was entering the world he occupied, the weight of it, the things that didn't get explained. She was not naive. She was, if anything, strategically clear-eyed. She had her own money, her own family's connections, her own reasons for being in this particular relationship, and she had never confused those reasons with anything softer. But the park had changed the calibration, not because of Alara Quinn. She could manage. Alara Quinn had already tried to, with the envelope which Dante still didn't know about. What the park had changed was her understanding of what Dante had actually withheld from her. The twins were not an abstract complication. They were 4 years old, and they had his face, and one of them had looked at Dante and said a word that restructured the entire foundation of the next 20 years of Celeste's life. She sat in her apartment in River North, not Dante's space, her own, which she'd kept deliberately, opened her laptop, and began making calls through her lawyer to a private researcher she'd used before. She didn't ask for anything dramatic, just documents. Financial records, legal records, organizational history. The kind of thing that lived in the margins of official accounts, the kind that a woman with the right resources could access if she knew where to look and wasn't too particular about methodology. What she found 4 days later was a name, Marcus Vale. Specifically, documents from 6 years ago showing that the threat to Alara Quinn's family, the threat that had been the stated reason Dante ended his engagement, had originated not from an external organization operating independently, but from a chain of decisions that, when traced carefully, led back to people inside Dante's own structure. She sat with that for a long time. Then she called Dante. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm in the middle of something. I know, I need 20 minutes. A pause, tonight. My place. 8 o'clock. She arrived at 8 to find him still in his work clothes, jacket off, sleeves pushed up, with the specific tightness around his eyes that meant he hadn't been sleeping well. She'd seen that look before. She'd seen it more in the past week than in the previous year combined. She sat down. She didn't take off her coat. "I had someone look into the documents around what happened with Alara's family 6 years ago," she said. He went very still. "Celeste. Before you say anything, I didn't do it out of jealousy. I'm not in a jealousy position with Alara Quinn. She's not my competition. She's the mother of your children, which is a different category entirely." She held his eyes. "I did it because the park made me understand that you've been carrying something for 3 years that you never fully told me. And I am not good at being in the dark about things that affect my life." "What did you find?" he said. "That the threat that made you break off your engagement may not have come from where you were told it came from." She paused. "Who brought you that intelligence, Dante?" The muscle in his jaw tightened. "Celeste. Who brought it to you?" He looked at her for a long time. "Marcus," he said. She nodded slowly. "And you're already looking at Marcus. For the last 5 days. And he stood and walked to the window and looked out at the city and didn't answer immediately, and she let him not answer, because she had learned when to give him room and when to push, and this was a room moment. "What I'm finding," he said finally, "is that I may have spent 3 years believing I made a sacrifice that protected someone, when actually I made a move in someone else's game without knowing I was playing." She let that sit. "That's a hard thing to sit with," she said. "Yes, and the twins." "Yes, Dante," she stood. She crossed to where he was standing, and he turned from the window to face her, and she looked at him the way she'd always looked at him, clearly, without the softness she'd seen other women use, because she'd always believed that the clearest thing she could offer him was honesty. "I am not going to pretend I don't have feelings about this, because I do, and some of them aren't pretty." She paused. "But I also know what you're up against, and I know what Marcus is now. So I'm telling you what I found as information, not as a demand, not as ultimatum, as information." He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" he said. "Because whatever happens between you and me, those boys are in danger, and that matters more than the rest of it." He was quiet. "You should know," he said, "that I don't fully understand yet what I want with the boys, with Alara. What's possible, I know that. And I don't know what that means for— I know that too." She picked up her coat. "I'm going home. And I'm not going to create a crisis right now, because there's already one in motion." She moved to the door, then stopped. "But Dante, when this is over, and I mean when it's actually over, we're going to have a real conversation about all of it, and I'm going to expect honesty. You'll get it." She left. Dante stood at his window for a long time after the door closed. Thursday came. The restaurant was in Streeterville, quiet for a place that expensive, the kind of dining room where the sound was engineered to make conversations feel private, even when they weren't. Dante arrived first. He always arrived first, another control posture that Marcus had once complimented him on. He ordered water and sat and watched the door. Marcus came in at 8:02, which was also deliberate. 2 minutes late, not enough to be disrespectful, enough to signal that his time was its own unit of currency. He was 61, broad through the shoulders, with a gray that had come in distinguished, and which he wore, without pretending it was anything other than what it was. He moved through the room, with the ease of a man who felt entitled to every space he occupied. He sat down, he smiled. "You look tired," Marcus said. "Long week, the Alara situation." Dante met his eyes. "You know about that. I was at your office Tuesday. Your assistant mentioned you'd had an unexpected encounter at the park." Marcus shrugged. "These things happen. How are you handling it?" "Carefully." "And the children?" Dante held Marcus's gaze for exactly the right amount of time. Not too long that would signal something. Not too short that would signal something else. "Complicated," Dante said. "Of course," Marcus picked up his menu. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. I just wanted to check in. Keep you in the loop." Marcus looked at him over the menu. Something moved through his eyes: calculation, adjustment, satisfaction. He believed he was being kept in the loop because Dante trusted him. Because Dante still didn't know. Dante let him believe it. "The boys," Marcus said. "Do they know who you are?" "Not yet. You'll want to handle that carefully. Children who find out that kind of thing without preparations." "I know." Marcus set the menu down. "Dante, for what it's worth, I know this situation is complicated. But you have people around you who can help navigate it. You don't have to carry it alone." Dante looked at the man who had built the trap he'd walked into at 34 years old, who had engineered the moment that cost him Alara and cost him 3 years of his son's lives, and who was now sitting across a restaurant table offering to help. "I know," Dante said. "That means a lot." They ordered. They ate. They talked about 3 other pieces of organizational business, all real, all routine. Marcus was relaxed. He was always relaxed. That was the thing Dante had always read as steadiness. He understood now it was something else. After dinner, walking out into the October air, Marcus put a hand briefly on Dante's shoulder. "Whatever you need," Marcus said. "You know where I am." "I do," Dante said. "Thank you." Marcus's car came. He got in. He left. Dante stood on the sidewalk and let himself feel it, the specific nausea of looking at someone you've known for 22 years and understanding for the first time what they actually are. Not a dramatic revelation, just a reckoning. He pulled out his phone. "Solus, I need everything ready by Monday. All of it." He put the phone away. He stood in the October cold for another minute. Then he drove to North Clark and sat in his car half a block from Alara's building for 20 minutes, not getting out, just sitting. He could see the light on in the 3rd-floor window. Yellow. Warm. Probably the kitchen. He thought about what was happening in that kitchen, whether they were eating dinner, whether the boys were arguing over something, whether Alara was doing that thing she used to do where she stood at the counter and read the news on her phone while things cooked, and then was always slightly surprised when they were done. He didn't get out of the car. He drove home. 9 days after the cafe conversation, Alara came home from the grocery store to find her front door unlocked. She stood in the hallway with both bags of groceries and looked at the door. She had locked it. She always locked it. She locked it 3 times in her head every time she left physical action. Verbal confirmation, mental image of the locked door, because that was the kind of mother she'd had to become. The door was unlocked. She set the bags down quietly and pushed the door open. The apartment was intact. Nothing overturned. Nothing missing at first glance. Nothing dramatic. But on the kitchen table, where she had left a pile of mail, and Adrian's coloring book, and a half-empty coffee mug, there was now a single photograph. Nico and Adrian. At their preschool, through the chain-link fence of the small playground. Shot from outside. Yesterday's date was written on the back in pen. She stood in her kitchen, holding the photograph, and let the full weight of it move through her. Not panic. Something past panic, something colder. Someone had been in her apartment. Had walked through her door and left this on her table and walked out. Had been inside the space where her boys lived. Her hands were steady when she picked up her phone. She called Dante. He answered in one ring. "Someone was in my apartment," she said. She heard him go very still on the other end. That specific stillness she recognized, the one that preceded action. "Are at school." "They're fine. They're at school." "Don't go anywhere. I'm Dante." She cut him off. Her voice was flat, deliberate. "I need you to understand something. I am standing in my kitchen holding a photograph of my children taken yesterday at their school through a fence. Someone was in my home. And I need you to understand that this is no longer about your terms or my terms or our boundaries. She paused. I need you to tell me who is doing this. Silence. I think I know, he said. But I need 2 more days to be certain. You don't have 2 more days, Dante. They were inside my home. I know, then act like you know. She put the photograph face down on the table. Call Rourke in. Tell him to move from the corner to the door. And then you find me the name in 48 hours. Or, I pull the boys from school and I disappear. And this time I make sure you can't find me. He said nothing for a moment. Rourke moves to the door tonight, he said. And I'll have a name for you by Saturday. Saturday, she repeated. Yes. She looked at the upturned photograph on her kitchen table. Someone was in my home, she said again, more quietly. I know. His voice was different from anything she'd heard from him in the past week, stripped of the control, of the management. Just the voice underneath. Elara, I'm going to fix this, you better, she said. She hung up. She called the school. Nico and Adrian were in afternoon class, making something with paint, everything fine. She drove to pick them up 2 hours early and held them both in the school lobby for a moment longer than usual. Long enough for Nico to say, Mommy, you're squishing me, which made her laugh, which was the right response. The response that didn't scare them. She drove them home. She let them play. She sat at the kitchen table with the photograph face down in front of her and waited for Saturday and tried to remember what it felt like to trust that things could be fixed and couldn't quite get there. Rourke moved from the corner to the door. 2 floors up, Adrian fell asleep mid-sentence, telling Nico about a dream he'd had the night before. 41 hours later, Dante got the name he already knew, confirmed now beyond argument, delivered in a folder with documentation that would end a 22-year relationship and begin a war inside his own organization. The name was Marcus Vale. He stared at it in black and white, fully confirmed, and felt something close with finality inside him, the last door between suspicion and certainty, swinging shut. He called Elara. Sattery said, Same cafe, same time. You have it, she said. Yes. A pause. Is it as bad as I think it is, she said. He looked at the folder. It's worse, he said. The line stayed open for another 3 seconds, neither of them speaking, both of them understanding that when they sat down in that cafe on Saturday morning, nothing would look the same as it had looked the morning before. Then Elara said quietly, I'll be there. The cafe on Armitage was the same cafe. Same worn tile, same mismatched chairs, same pastry case rotating its slow, indifferent circle. Elara arrived 8 minutes early again and took the corner table again and sat with her back to the wall again. And the repetition of it felt like something between ritual and trap. She ordered tea she wouldn't drink. Dante arrived exactly on time. He looked worse than he had 9 days ago. Not dramatically, Dante Vescari didn't do dramatic deterioration. He did the controlled kind, the kind that showed up as 2 degrees less sleep in the set of his eyes and a jaw that was working slightly harder than usual to stay neutral. He sat down. He put a folder on the table between them, but didn't open it. Marcus Vale, he said. She'd half expected the name from the phone call. Hearing it stated flat across a cafe table was still different. Tell me everything, she said, he told her. It took longer than the first conversation. More complicated, more layered, with the specific denseness of a deception that had been constructed over years by someone who understood the person being deceived at a cellular level. She listened without interrupting. She was good at that she'd had to become good at it because the boys talked constantly and simultaneously, and interrupting them only produced louder simultaneous talking. When he finished, she looked at the folder. Can I see it? He opened it and turned it toward her. She read slowly. She was a careful reader, always had been, which had driven Dante slightly insane when they were together, because she read everything before signing or deciding, every document, every agreement, every menu if she had time. He'd teased her about it once. She'd told him that people who didn't read things before agreeing to them were the reason lawyers existed. She read the payment records, the communication traces, the timeline that Solis had constructed, showing Marcus's contact with Gregor Vasic beginning 2 months before Dante ended their engagement. She turned the last page over. He built the threat, she said. Yes. Or amplified an existing one, past the point where I could have managed it differently. Either way, the intelligence he brought me was shaped to produce one outcome. He made you break up with me. He gave me the information that made me believe breaking up with you was the only way to keep you alive. Whether he manufactured the threat entirely or just weaponized a real one, I don't know yet. She closed the folder and the photographs on your desk. That was him announcing that he knew about the boys. Yes. Why now? Why after 3 years? Dante's hands were flat on the table. Because something changed in the organization. There's a succession question. There's been one building for 2 years. Marcus was promised a long time ago that he'd have a role in what came after me. But the structure's been shifting. New people, new alliances. His position isn't what it was. He paused. I think he decided the twins were better leverage now than they'd ever be again. Use them to force my hand before the window closed. Force your hand, how? Make me choose. The organization or them. He held her eyes. He was betting I'd choose the organization. She looked at him. Would you have, she said, a year ago, before the park. The pause was honest. I don't know, he said. I would have told myself I'd protect them without dismantling everything. I would have believed it. He paused again. I don't know if it would have been true. She appreciated the honesty enough not to say so. What's your plan, she said. Monday. I'm bringing everything to the people in my organization who are clean and who have the most to lose from connections to Vasic. There are 4 of them. If they see the documents, they'll move against Marcus. It's in their interest. It ends his position permanently and it exposes the Vasic relationship, which is a threat to all of them. He folded his hands. After that, I take everything to the federal contact I've been building for 2 years. The whole Vasic network, in exchange for reduced exposure. For me, she looked at him. You're going to cooperate with federal investigators. I'm going to give them something worth more than me. His voice was even. It's been in motion for a while. Before the park, before any of this. I was already building an exit. He met her eyes. I just didn't know yet what I was building it toward. She sat with that. How long, she said, before Marcus is handled? Monday moves fast if I do it right. A week, maybe less, before it's structurally over for him. And the boys are safe in that week. Rourke is on the door. I'm adding 2 more people to the building perimeter tonight. And Marcus doesn't know yet that I know, which means he has no reason to move before Monday. You're sure he doesn't know? I had dinner with him Thursday. He thinks I'm in the dark and managing the Alara situation emotionally. Something cold moved through his expression. He's very comfortable. She looked at the folder again. Okay, she said. Okay, meaning I understand the plan. Meaning I'll keep the boys on their normal schedule this week, so nothing looks different. She picked up her tea, finally, found it cold, put it back. And meaning I need you to promise me something. What? When it's over, when Marcus is handled and the federal piece is in motion, you tell me the full truth. Not the version that protects me from feeling things. The actual truth, everything. About 6 years ago, and what you knew and what you chose. She held his eyes. I need to know all of it. You'll have it. I mean it. I know you do. She stood. He stood. They stood on opposite sides of the table, in the cafe on Armitage on a Saturday morning, and looked at each other, and it was the first time since the park that the looking felt like something other than combat. Go home, she said. Get some sleep. You look terrible. Thank you, he said dryly. Just enough, she left. He sat back down and looked at the folder and thought about Monday. He should have been thinking harder about Saturday night. He was in his office at 10:40 Saturday evening when Solis called. Not texted. Called. Which meant it was the kind of thing that couldn't go in writing. Talk, Dante said. Marcus requested a meeting. Solis's voice was careful and flat, not through the normal channel. Direct to 2 of the 4 people you were planning to approach on Monday. Dante was standing at his desk. He didn't sit down. Which 2? Solis told him. The 2 Marcus had contacted were, of the 4 Dante had identified as clean, the 2 with the longest history with Marcus, the 2 who had known him longest and trusted him most. When is the meeting, Dante said. Tonight. 11. The place on Huron. Dante looked at his watch. 11. 20 minutes away. How did you find out, he said. One of them called me. A pause. He said Marcus told them you'd been compromised, that you'd made contact with federal investigators and were building a case against the organization to negotiate your own exit. That the documents you've been gathering aren't about Marcus, they're about all of them, and you've been framing Marcus to use as cover. The room was very quiet. Dante understood what he was hearing. He understood it in the specific, total way of someone watching a trap close that had been set much earlier than they'd realized. Marcus hadn't been waiting for Monday. Marcus had known somehow had known, or had moved preemptively when he sensed the ground shifting, and he had moved first. He had inverted everything. The evidence Dante had gathered to expose Marcus was now, in the version Marcus was telling, evidence of Dante's own betrayal of his organization. The federal contact Dante had been building was, in Marcus's framing, proof that Dante had already turned. People Dante had planned to bring to his side were sitting in a room on Huron Street, being told that Dante was their enemy. What did he say? Dante said. When they called you, he said Marcus had documentation, that he'd been building a record of your federal contacts for months. That's impossible. The contact was I know, but they have something. I don't know what it is yet. Dante's jaw was tight. Are they going to move against me tonight? I don't know. That's why I'm calling, he thought fast. 20 minutes to Huron. He could go and walk into whatever Marcus had arranged. He could go, and it could be a conversation that still had room to move in. He could stay away and let Marcus's version of the story be the only one in the room. The people he's meeting with, Dante said. The one who called you. Does he believe Marcus? He's not sure. That's why he called me. He wants us the other side. Tell him I need 10 minutes with him before he makes any decision. Tonight. Can you arrange that? A pause. Then maybe. He's cautious. Tell him I have documents that contradict everything Marcus is saying. Tell him the truth about the federal contact is more complicated than what Marcus told him. Tell him I'm not asking him to trust me. I'm asking him to wait 10 minutes before deciding. I'll try. Call me back. Dante hung up. He pulled on his jacket and went to his car. He drove toward Huron Street anyway, because waiting in his office felt like surrender, and he'd never been able to sit still when the ground was moving. Solis called back at 10:58. He'll meet you. Separate location, not the Huron meeting. There's a bar on Erie, back room. 15 minutes, I'll be there. The man's name was Costello. He was 54, heavyset, had been in the organization since Dante's father's time, and had the particular quality of people who survived long and complicated structures. He was deeply suspicious of everyone equally, which made him, paradoxically, one of the more reliable people Dante knew. He was already in the back room when Dante arrived, sitting with a glass of something brown, watching the door with the expression of a man who was genuinely undecided and knew it. Talk, Costello said fast. Dante sat and opened his phone and walked him through it. The payment records, the timeline, the Vasic connection. He had photographs of the physical documents on his phone, something he'd done instinctively on Thursday after Solis delivered the folder, a habit of redundancy. Costello looked at each one carefully. Marcus's version, Costello said, is that you've been building a case against the organization? The federal contact is real. The federal contact is real, Dante said. Costello looked up. I've been in conversation with a federal investigator for 14 months, Dante said. Not to build a case against the organization. To dismantle the Vasic network, in exchange for a negotiated outcome for our side. He held Costello's eyes. I was going to bring that to the table Monday, with these documents. As a package, here's what I've found about Marcus. Here's what I've built with the federal side. Here's the exit that protects the most people. Marcus says you're burning us to save yourself. Marcus needs me discredited before I can show anyone what I found about him. Dante kept his voice level. Look at the timeline. Look at when his payments to Vasic started. Look at what the threat to Lara Quinn actually was and where it originated. If Marcus built or amplified that threat, if he engineered my decision 6 years ago, then he's been running a parallel operation inside this organization for longer than any of us knew. He's not protecting the organization. He's been selling it. Costello looked at the phone again, at the documents. I need to verify these independently, he said. I know. I can give you the source. It's Solis, who you know and who has no stake in this beyond the truth. Dante paused. All I'm asking is that you verify before you decide. Don't let Marcus move you tonight based on one side of the story. Costello drank his bourbon slowly. If what you're showing me is accurate, he said, Marcus Vale has been compromised for 6 years. Yes. And everything he's managed in that time needs to be reviewed. Yes. A long silence. Costello said finally. Don't contact anyone else tonight. Let me make some calls. Costello, go home, Dante. You've said what you came to say. Now let me work. Dante went home. He did not sleep. At 3:17 in the morning, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. Mr. Vescari. The voice was male, measured, with the specific professional neutrality of someone who spent their career not sounding like anything in particular. My name isn't important right now. What's important is that I'm calling on behalf of a mutual concern we share about Marcus Vale's activities. Dante sat up in the dark. Who are you? He said. Someone who's been watching the same person you've been watching. For longer. A pause. We need to meet. Tomorrow. And you need to know before we meet that the situation with your former fiancée and her sons is more urgent than you currently understand. Dante's hand tightened on the phone. What does that mean? It means that Marcus Vale made a call tonight that had nothing to do with the meeting on Huron Street. It means he has a location, a specific location that he's been holding in reserve. The voice paused. Mr. Vescari. He knows where the boys go to school. He knows the Sunday morning routine. And after the call he made tonight, I believe his timeline has moved. Dante was already out of bed. Alara, he said. Her building. Your man Rourke is still on the door. She's fine right now. The voice was careful. But right now is a specific condition that changes quickly. We need to meet tomorrow morning, and you need to make a decision about what you're willing to give up to end this. Where? Dante said. The man gave him an address. Dante wrote it on his hand because he didn't trust himself to remember anything correctly in the next few minutes. He hung up. He called Rourke. Talk to me, Dante said. Rourke said. Building's quiet. Nothing on the street. Keep your eyes open. If anything moves anything. A car slowing down. Someone walking past twice, you call me immediately. Understood. A pause. What's happening? I don't know yet, Dante said. Which is the problem. He called Alara next. It was 3:22 in the morning, and he called her anyway, because the alternative was not calling her, and he couldn't do that. She answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Dante, not a question. She'd seen the name on the screen and answered, and was already halfway awake, because that was how she slept now, with one ear open. I need you to listen to me, he said. Don't panic. When someone says don't panic, it's because there's something to panic about. Marcus moved faster than I expected. I don't think there's immediate danger, but the timeline has changed and I need you to do something for me. A silence. He heard her sit up. What? She said. Tomorrow morning. Don't take the boys to the store. Stay in the building. Normal morning inside. Nothing that puts them on the street. Another silence. How bad is it? She said. He thought about how to answer that. It's manageable, he said. But I need one day to manage it. Dante. Her voice was flat and precise and completely awake now. How bad? He looked at his hand, where the address was written. He knows their school, he said, and their Sunday routine. The silence that followed was a different kind. Okay, she said finally. Her voice had gone somewhere very quiet and very cold. Okay, we stay in. I know Rourke is on the door. I've watched him drink 3 cups of coffee every morning from my window. A pause. Fix this, Dante. I'm going to. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Fix this. She hung up. He stood in his dark bedroom in his 3,000-square-foot apartment in a building with its own security staff and access control, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely afraid. Not for himself. For 2 4-year-old boys who were asleep right now, with no idea that the world outside their window had teeth. He got dressed. He drove to the address on his hand 3 hours early and sat outside it in his car and watched the street go gray with the beginning of Sunday. The man was already inside when Dante arrived at 6. He was younger than the voice had suggested, mid-40s perhaps, with the kind of forgettable face that was its own professional asset. He was sitting at a table in a coffee shop that hadn't opened yet, which told Dante he had either a key or a relationship with the owner, both of which told him something. There was a folder on the table. Different folder from Solis's. Thicker. Sit down, the man said. Dante sat. My name is Reeves, the man said. I'm a senior investigator with the Federal Organized Crime Task Force. I know about your 14 months of back-channel conversation with my colleague, and I'm here because that conversation has reached a point where we need to accelerate it. Why? Because Marcus Vale is not only compromised through Gregor Vasic. Reeves opened the folder and turned it to face Dante. He's been running a secondary operation that neither you nor my colleague knew about. Dante looked at the first page. He read it. He turned to the second page. The coffee shop was silent around them. Chairs still up on tables. Lights at half, the smell of yesterday's coffee grounds. Dante read to the 5th page and then stopped and looked up. This says Marcus is actively building a case for transfer of control, Dante said, that he's been negotiating with Vasic for 2 years to hand over. The whole structure. Yes. In exchange for a position inside Vasic's organization. Reeves's voice was professionally even. Marcus doesn't want to inherit what you have. He never did. He wants to liquidate it. Sell the infrastructure. The contacts, the routes, the compromised officials, everything, to Vasic. And to do that, he needs you gone, and he needs anyone who would resist him gone. Dante looked at the folder. The photographs of the boys, he said, were never about leverage to get you to step down. They were always about forcing you to make a move to come out into the open, to act emotionally, to give him the opportunity to have you removed by your own people. Reeves held his eyes. The Huron Street meeting last night. The story he told your associates about you, cooperating with federal investigators. He used real information, Mr. Vescari. He knows about our contact. He's known for a while. He let it develop because it gave him the perfect tool. He let me build the case for my own destruction, Dante said. He let you build credibility with us, and then handed the fact of that credibility to your people as proof of betrayal. Reeves paused. It's sophisticated. He's had years to construct it. Dante stared at the table. The thing was, he could see it. Now that it was in front of him, he could see the whole architecture, the 6-year timeline, the careful cultivation, the way Marcus had always been available, always been reasonable, always been the steadying voice. He had been building the conditions for this moment for longer than Dante had been in charge of anything, with a patience that was almost inhuman. And last night he'd moved. What happened to Costello, Dante said, after the Huron meeting. Reeves's expression shifted slightly. That's the other thing I need to tell you, he said. Dante looked at him. Costello left the meeting on Huron at 11:45. His car was found at midnight, 2 blocks from his building. Reeves paused. He's in the hospital. He'll recover. But someone made a very clear statement. The coffee shop was very quiet. Marcus moved against Costello, Dante said. We believe so. We can't prove it yet. Costello called me. After the meeting, he was going to verify independently. Marcus knew that means Costello was a loose end. Reeves closed the folder. Mr. Vescari. We're past the point where this resolves cleanly through your original plan. Marcus isn't waiting for Monday. He isn't waiting for anything. He is in motion right now. Dante put both hands flat on the table. Then tell me what you need, he said. Everything you have. Tonight. Not Monday, tonight. Full cooperation, full documentation, and your testimony about the organizational structure going back 10 years. Reeves met his eyes without flinching. In exchange, the task force will move on Marcus Vale and the Vosic network simultaneously within 24 hours of receiving your cooperation, and your negotiated outcome stands. And the boys. We can provide protective custody. Dante's voice was flat. They're not going into protective custody. They're 4 years old. Their mother is not going to allow Mr. Vescari. I'll take Marcus myself before I let 2 4-year-old boys go into federal protective custody. He said it without heat. Just fact. Find another option. Reeves looked at him for a moment. There's a safe house, he said carefully. Unofficial. Not on paper. We've used it before for exactly this kind of situation, family members who can't be visible in the system. It's a house, not a facility. Comfortable, secure. Where? I'm not telling you where until Ms. Quinn agrees. That's her decision. Reeves paused. But you need to get her to agree. And you need to get her there. And it needs to happen today. Dante thought about the phone call at 3 a.m, about Alara's voice going quiet and cold when he told her. Marcus knew their Sunday routine. He thought about 2 boys asleep in a 3rd-floor apartment on North Clark. He thought about Costello's car, found 2 blocks from his building at midnight. Give me an hour, he said. He stood, walked outside, and called Ilara. She answered on the first ring. The boys are up, she said. Nico wants pancakes. Adrian is arguing that we should have eggs instead. This is our morning. Her voice was careful, holding things in place. I need you to listen to me, Dante said. And I need you to stay calm while I tell you, because the boys are in the room with you and they read your face. A pause. Go ahead, she said. He told her about Reeves, about the folder, about Costello, about the timeline and what Marcus had actually been building toward, the full shape of it, the way it had been constructed around Dante's own movements. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said he was never going to wait. No. The photographs. The apartment. That was all just staging. Yes. To get me to act. To give him what he needed to move against me from inside. Another silence. And the boys are in danger while Marcus is still free to move. Yes, Dante kept his voice even. There is an option. Not a facility, a house off paper. He paused. I need you to consider it. I need to look my boys in the face while I decide that, she said. I know. I'm going to make pancakes, and I'm going to think. And in 40 minutes, I'm going to call you back. Okay, Dante. Her voice went to a register he hadn't heard before, or had heard once 6 years ago in a very different context. Not soft, just stripped of the armor for one sentence. If something happens to them, nothing is going to happen to them. That's not a promise you can make. No, he said, but I'm making it anyway. The line stayed open for 2 seconds. Then she said quietly and with complete authority, 40 minutes. She made the pancakes. She watched her sons argue cheerfully about syrup distribution. She looked at their faces, Nico's careful focus, Adrian's open delight, and made the decision that there was only one decision to make. She called Dante back in 38 minutes. "Tell me about the house," she said. And 4 hours later, when Alara Quinn walked out of her building on North Clark, with 2 backpacks and 2 small boys, and a duffel bag and Rourke on one side and a second man she didn't know on the other, she did not look back at the building. She had already decided that looking back was a thing she was done with. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Marcus Vale had a man 3 blocks away who watched them leave, and who sent a single text to a number that went directly to Marcus. The text said, "They're moving," and Marcus, reading it in the back of a car heading south on Lakeshore Drive, smiled the way a man smiles when the piece he's been waiting for finally moves onto the square he'd always planned to take it. He typed back, "Good." Then he made a call that set the final piece in motion, a call that would, within 6 hours, put Alara and the twins somewhere that was not the safe house Reeves had arranged, somewhere that only Marcus knew, and forced Dante Vescari to make the choice Marcus had always believed he would never actually make. The text reached Marcus at 2:14 in the afternoon. By 2:31, the man 3 blocks from North Clark had made a second call, not to Marcus this time, but to a woman named Dara, who worked as a dispatcher for a private car service and who had, for the past 8 months, been on Marcus's payroll for exactly this kind of coordination. Dara made a call. The call reached a driver. The driver was already positioned. None of this was improvised. That was the part that would stay with Dante longest afterward, not the violence of it, not the fear, but the understanding that every step of the sequence had been planned and rehearsed and was executing now with the kind of smoothness that only came from months of preparation. While Dante had been gathering documents for 10 days, Marcus had been running a parallel operation for the better part of a year. The documents were real. The federal contact was real. And Marcus had known about both and had used that knowledge to build a trap with 2 exits, both of which led to the same room. Dante didn't know any of this yet at 2:31. At 2:31, Dante was in a parking garage in the West Loop with Reeves, transferring files from an encrypted drive to a federal server in the back of an unmarked sedan, doing the thing he'd spent 14 months preparing to do, believing that Alara and the boys were 40 minutes ahead of him, on their way to a house in a suburb whose address was on a card in his inside breast pocket. His phone buzzed at 2:44 Rourke. He picked up. "Talk." Rourke's voice was tight in a way it had never been in 10 days of check-ins. "We have a problem, the second car. It cut us off on the ramp to 94. There were 3 of them. They had a sound, not a gunshot. Something heavier. They had a vehicle block. Professional. Alara and the boys are static. Then nothing." Dante stood in the parking garage with the phone against his ear and the static running, and Reeves 3 feet away, watching his face change and understanding from the change alone that the situation had just restructured itself completely. "Rourke," Dante said. "Level controlled." The control cost him something he could feel in his back teeth. "Nothing, Rourke." Reeves stepped forward. "What happened?" Dante lowered the phone. He looked at Reeves with the specific look of a man who has just had every calculation he made in the last 10 days rendered irrelevant in 44 seconds. "They took them," he said. Reeves went still. The intercept was on the ramp to 94. They had a vehicle block. Dante's voice was completely flat. Marcus knew they were moving. "That's not possible. The safe house location was..." He didn't need the location. He needed to know they were in a car. Dante was already moving back toward his own vehicle. He had someone watching the building. Dante Reeves moved after him. "Dante, stop. If you go after this alone, then send people with me." Dante turned. His eyes were the specific kind of calm that existed on the other side of panic. The kind that wasn't peace, but was something colder and more functional. "You have the files. You have everything you need to move on Marcus and Vasek tonight. Move on them. And while you're doing that, find me where Marcus Vale keeps things he doesn't want found. We don't have that intelligence yet. You've been watching him for how long?" Reeves's jaw tightened. 18 months. "Then you have something. A property. A location he uses that isn't on paper. Everyone has one." Dante held his eyes. "Find it, fast. Because he has my sons." He got in his car. Reeves stood in the parking garage for 3 seconds, making the calculation that federal investigators made when the situation exceeded the protocol they'd prepared for. Then he got on his radio. Dante drove. He called every number he had. Solis first. Solis was already hearing things. Already had 2 addresses that Marcus used for sensitive meetings, neither of them registered to Marcus or anything connected to him. Dante wrote them both on his hand. Then he called 2 men who had been with him for 8 years and who were not in the room Marcus had been building against him. Men whose loyalty was the kind that didn't get purchased because they'd never needed purchasing. He told them both the same thing. The address on his left hand and the address on his right, split between them. Go now, call me when your eye's on. Then he drove south on Lake Shore with both hands on the wheel and the windows down because he needed the cold air to think. His phone rang. Unknown number. Different from Reeves's unknown. This one had a 312 area code, Chicago local, which meant it was deliberate. He answered. Marcus, he said. You sound calm? Marcus's voice was exactly the same as it had been at dinner on Thursday. Warm, easy, faintly paternal in the way it had always been. I've always admired that about you. Where are they? Safe. Genuinely, I want you to know that. The children are completely fine. Alara is shaken but unharmed. Nobody has any interest in hurting a 32-year-old woman or 2 4-year-old boys. A pause. This was never about them, Dante. You know that. Then let them go. Of course, that's exactly what I want to do. A pause that was calibrated to feel reasonable. We need to talk about what comes after. That's all this ever was. A conversation we couldn't have in a restaurant with documents on a table, with federal investigators in a parking garage. Another pause. I know about Reeves, by the way. I know about 14 months of conversations. I know what you gave him this afternoon. His voice didn't change. That was the thing, it never changed. I don't hold it against you. I want you to understand that. Because what I'm proposing doesn't require you to be loyal to me. It just requires you to step back. Step back meaning what? Step back meaning you take your family, all of them. The boys, Alara, whoever else matters to you, and you go somewhere quiet, and you build the life you were clearly already planning to build. The federal negotiation proceeds. You get your reduced exposure. He paused, and the organization transitions to new leadership, smoothly, without the additional complications of your testimony about the internal structure. You want me to stop cooperating with Reeves. I want you to limit your cooperation to the VASIC network, which is what you originally offered, not the internal structure, not the people inside who were managing operations. His voice was gentle. That's all. Dante drove. He understood what Marcus was offering. A version of the exit he'd planned, with one significant alteration. The parts of testimony that would expose Marcus's people would be redacted. Marcus would transition into control. VASIC's network would be dismantled. Marcus didn't care about VASIC personally, had been using the connection instrumentally. And Dante would disappear into a quiet life, with the federal deal intact and his family untouched. It was almost reasonable, which was how Marcus has always operated. In the almost reasonable. I need to know they're safe, Dante said. I need to hear her voice. A pause. A shuffle of sound. Then Dante. Ilara's voice. Controlled in the specific way she controlled things when she was terrified and determined not to be. We're okay. Both boys are okay. Adrian's upset, but Nico, her voice caught for half a second. Nico's keeping it together. They're okay. Alara. Don't make a decision based on us. Her voice was low and fast, right at the edge of what Marcus's people would allow her to say. Don't you dare make it. The phone moved. Marcus again. She's persuasive, Marcus said. I can see why you kept her in your life. Give me 2 hours to consider what you're proposing, Dante said. Of course, and Marcus. He kept his voice completely even. If anything happens to those boys, Marcus's voice was patient. Nothing is going to happen to anyone. That's the entire point of this conversation. The call ended. Dante immediately called Solis. The property on his right hand, the one in Bridgeport. Talk to me. It's registered to a company called Fenwick Holdings. 3 layers of shell, but it traces back to a trust that Marcus has had since 2009. Solis's voice was fast. It's a warehouse conversion. Industrial area. Street access from 2 sides. Loading dock on the south end. How many people would he need to run that location? For what he's doing, 4 minimum. 6 more likely. Dante's man on the Bridgeport address called in. At that moment, he was eyes on. There were 2 vehicles parked at the south entrance, lights inside. He'd counted at least 3 people through the windows on a brief pass. That's it, Dante said. He turned south. He had 2 hours, which Marcus had offered, because Marcus believed he was the one controlling the clock. Marcus was wrong. 2 hours was more time than Dante needed, and the only question now was how to do this without getting Alara or the boys hurt by men who were professionals and who were inside a building Dante had never seen. He called Reeves. Bridgeport, he said, and gave the address. How fast can you get people there? For a federal operation we need. Not a federal operation. You have field agents? You have people who can move without filing paperwork first. He paused. Give me 3 agents in 40 minutes. A silence. You understand what you're asking? Reeves said. I'm asking you to help me get my sons out of a warehouse in Bridgeport before Marcus decides that 2 hours was a courtesy and not a commitment. His voice stayed even. 3 agents. 40 minutes. And whatever happens inside that building, your task force gets full credit for the bust. I was never there. Another silence. 45 minutes, Reeves said. And you follow our lead. Within reason. Within reason, Reeves. That's the best I can give you. He parked 2 blocks from the Bridgeport address and sat in his car and did what he'd trained himself to do in the years when he'd been building the organization he thought about the scout to enter without having seen it, mapped what he knew, identified the variables he couldn't control, and made his peace with them. He was not a man who prayed. He sat in the car and thought about Nico keeping it together, which was exactly what Nico would do, because Nico was 4 years old and already understood instinctively that one of the 2 of them needed to hold. He thought about Adrian being upset, which was also exactly right, because Adrian felt everything at full volume and didn't yet know how to turn it down, and probably wouldn't ever fully learn. And that was fine. That was something Dante found he wanted to be there for. He thought about Alara saying, "Don't you dare make a decision based on us," in a voice that was half command and half the specific terror of a woman who had held everything together alone for 3 years and was not going to stop now. He got out of the car. Reeves's people arrived in 39 minutes. 3 agents, plain clothes, in 2 vehicles. They were professional enough not to introduce themselves with rank. They got out and looked at Dante with the expression of people who'd been told the situation was unusual and had decided to proceed anyway. 2 vehicles at the south entrance, Dante said. 3 confirmed inside, possibly 6. 2 access points south loading dock, and a street-level door on the east side. He looked at the 3 of them. I'm going in the east door. Whatever you do on the south side, give me 90 seconds from the moment you move. That's not how one of them started. I know how you do it. That's not what we're doing tonight. Dante looked at him. 90 seconds. Then come through the south. He walked. The east door was a steel utility door set into a brick wall that looked like it hadn't been opened in years, and had actually been opened recently. The edge of the frame showed fresh scuffing, the kind that came from traffic. He tested the handle. Locked. He had a tool for locks that he had carried for 12 years, and used rarely enough that it still felt like a last resort. He used it. The door opened into a corridor, concrete floor, bare overhead lights, the smell of old machine oil and newer food someone had been eating in here. The corridor ran south toward a larger space. He could hear voices, 2 distinct ones, neither of them Alara or the boys. He moved along the wall. The corridor opened into what had been a loading floor, high ceiling, concrete pillars, the ghost of industrial equipment in the bolts still anchored to the floor. At the far end, near the south loading dock, 2 men stood with their backs partly toward him. Between him and them, behind a pillar, there was a door, and from behind that door he could hear, faint but real, the sound of a child talking. Adrian. Saying something to Nico. He couldn't make out the words, but the voice was unmistakably Adrian, that particular cadence, that specific combination of anxiety and conversation. Dante moved. He was 20 feet from the pillar when one of the 2 men turned. The next 40 seconds were ugly in the specific way of real physical confrontation, not choreographed, not clean, nothing like the movie's version. It was fast and it hurt, and there were no good positions. Dante had spent years understanding violence without being comfortable with it, which made him functional in it rather than fluid. He got hit twice before he got control of the situation, once across the cheekbone and once in the ribs, and both of them registered as the kind of hits that would be significantly worse tomorrow than they were now. The second man went for something at his side. Dante got there first. He put both of them down in a way that was about leverage and position rather than brute force, and that left both of them breathing but temporarily uninterested in participating further. His cheek was bleeding. His ribs felt like they had opinions about every breath. He moved to the door, Alara. Not loud, controlled. A pause on the other side, Dante. Her voice from inches away through steel. She sounded like she'd been waiting and managing the wait, and the managing was reaching its limit. Stand back from the door. He got it open. She was on her feet, already moving, with Nico in her arms and Adrian pressed against her side with both fists clutching her jacket. They were unharmed visually, physically, unharmed, and the sight of them like that all three of them intact in that low-lit concrete room, hit Dante somewhere in the chest that he didn't have language for and didn't try to find. Alara looked at his face. "You're bleeding," she said. "I'm aware." The boys, "Stay behind me." He stepped back into the loading floor, putting himself between the door and the south end of the building. "We go out the east corridor." "Move," she moved. She was good at it, no hesitation, no freezing. She just gathered both boys and moved. Nico was silent, watching Dante with those dark eyes that were Dante's own eyes, processing everything and saying nothing. Adrian was crying quietly, the specific quiet crying of a child who has been crying for a while and is too tired to do it loudly anymore. And the sound of it did something to Dante's already damaged rib situation that had nothing to do with impact. They were halfway down the corridor when the south end of the building went loud. Reeves's people. Not 90 seconds, they'd given him closer to 3 minutes, which was professional courtesy of a kind Dante hadn't expected but was grateful for. The sound of it, voices, controlled chaos, the specific vocabulary of a federal operation, moving through a space covered their exit. They came out the east door into the cold Chicago night. His car was 2 blocks away. "Can you run?" he said to Alara. "Can you?" she said, looking at his ribs. Yes. They ran. She ran with one hand, holding Nico's and one arm around Adrian, and she ran with the complete commitment of a woman who had decided the only direction available was forward, and Dante ran beside her, with his hand pressed against his ribs, and his vision slightly narrowed from the cheekbone hit, and the blood on his face going cold in the October air. They got to the car. He got them in. He drove. For 4 blocks, nobody spoke. Adrian's quiet crying gradually slowed and then stopped, and he fell asleep in the way small children did completely, suddenly between 1 second and the next. Nico sat with his hands in his lap and looked out the window. Then Nico said to the window, "Are we safe now?" Dante looked in the rearview mirror, at the boy's profile, at the jaw that was unmistakably his. Nico considered this. "Okay," he said. Alara, in the passenger seat, had her head tipped back against the headrest and her eyes closed, and both hands flat on her thighs, and she was breathing with the deliberate evenness of someone managing their body's aftermath. Her knuckles were white. She was holding herself very still the way people did, when they were afraid that if they let go of the stillness everything they'd been holding would come apart at once. He drove. "After 2 more blocks," she said, without opening her eyes. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere that isn't on any list Marcus has," Dante said. "Is there such a place?" "Yes." She opened her eyes and looked at him. At his face, the blood, the cheekbone, the controlled damage of it. "You came alone," she said. "I had backup at the south entrance. But you came in alone." He didn't answer that. She looked at him for another moment, and she looked back at the road. "Your ribs?" she said. "Tomorrow's problem. Dante, I know, tomorrow." He pulled over outside a building in Ukrainian village that he had not used for anything in 4 years, and that existed in no organizational record, because it had never been organizational, it had been personal. A purchase made in his own name, before his name meant what it meant, before he'd learned to keep everything at arm's length. 3 floors, 6 units, entirely occupied by people who had no connection to anything and who had been paid 6 months ago to relocate temporarily while renovations were ongoing. The renovations had been completed 3 months ago. The building was empty. He got out. He opened the back door and looked at his sons, one asleep, one watching him with those eyes. "Come on," he said to Nico. Nico looked at him for a moment. Then he reached up. Dante picked him up. The weight of him was a specific thing, a real thing, something Dante would not be able to describe accurately later when he tried. He was heavier than expected, and he smelled like children's shampoo and fear, and the particular warmth of a small person who had been very brave for a long time. Nico put one hand on Dante's shoulder and didn't say anything. Dante carried him up the front steps. Alara got Adrian from the back seat without waking him and followed. Inside, on the second floor, there were 4 rooms with furniture that was plain and clean. There was food in the kitchen. He'd had Solus arrange it 3 days ago, without knowing why exactly, just knowing he needed a fallback that was off every list. He put Nico down on a couch in the front room. Nico lay down immediately and was asleep in under a minute, the way children went when they'd finally reached a place their body decided was safe enough. Alara put Adrian on the couch beside his brother. She stood up and turned around and looked at Dante. He was leaning against the wall because standing upright without support had started requiring negotiation. His jacket was dark enough that the blood wasn't obvious, but she could see the way he was holding his right arm slightly away from his body, the protective posture of cracked, or at least seriously bruised ribs. Sit down, she said. I need to call Reeves. Call him sitting down. She crossed to the kitchen. He heard her opening cabinets. She came back with a dish towel and sat down on the coffee table facing him, which meant he had to sit, which he did, because standing was getting less negotiable. She pressed the towel against his cheekbone. He sat. She looked at his face while she did it not medically, not with the practiced distance of assessment, but with the specific directness of someone who needed to see something fully before they could keep going. The boys, she said, are fine. I know they're fine. I can see them. She adjusted the towel. He felt the pressure in his cheekbone and kept his face neutral. I mean, what they saw tonight, what they went through. They were in a room together, unharmed. Nico was protecting Adrian. He paused. They're going to be okay. You can't know that. No, he said, but I think it. She looked at him. Marcus, she said. Reeves has the building. Marcus will be picked up tonight. He was never at the Bridgeport location. He was running it from somewhere else, which means he walked into the federal operation that was already in motion. He paused. He's done, and his people. The ones at the building are in federal custody. The others will follow. He met her eyes. It's over, Alara. She held the towel against his face and didn't say anything for a moment. You gave Reeves everything, she said. Yes. The full cooperation. Not the limited version. Yes. What does that mean for you? It means a process. A legal process over time. The negotiated outcome is still in place. Reeves held to it. He paused. It means I'm not going to prison, but it means the organization is finished. Everything I built, everything my father built before me, it gets dismantled. He held her eyes. I made that choice. Tonight, not reluctantly. She looked at him for a long moment. You chose them, she said. I chose all of you, he said. If that's a thing you'll let me say. She took the towel away from his face and looked at the cut. It had slowed. It would leave something, not a scar exactly, but a mark for a while. She folded the towel to a clean section and put it back. It's a thing you can say, she said. I'm not going to tell you what it means yet, but you can say it. He nodded. They sat in the quiet of the empty building with the boys asleep 10 feet away, and Chicago running its indifferent nighttime course outside the windows, and Dante leaned his head back against the wall and let himself breathe at whatever pace his ribs would allow. His phone rang. Reeves, he answered. Marcus Vale is in custody, Reeves said. We picked him up at his River North apartment 40 minutes ago. He was a pause that carried something in it. He was surprised. He didn't think I'd move that fast. No, another pause. He said something when we brought him in. I thought you should hear it. Tell me, he said. And I'm quoting, he never would have done this for the organization. I knew he wouldn't. I just didn't think he'd do it for them. Reeves paused. He sounded more confused than angry, like he'd gotten the math right and the answer was still wrong. Dante looked at the ceiling. He was betting I'd choose the Empire, Dante said. Yes, he lost. Yes. Reeves's voice shifted slightly. For what it's worth, what you gave us tonight is going to matter. The Vosic network has been running for 11 years. What you provided is going to bring it down. A pause. That matters. I know, Dante said. He hung up. Alara was watching him. It's done, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the boys, both of them breathing, both of them out completely. Nico with one arm thrown over Adrian, the way he slept at home, instinctive and certain. She looked back at Dante. Go to sleep, she said. Your ribs need ice and you need sleep, and I need to sit here for a while and be okay with the fact that I'm not okay yet. I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to stop standing. She met his eyes. We'll talk. Tomorrow. About everything, all of it. But tonight, she stopped. Tonight, just stop. He stopped. He sat back. He closed his eyes. Outside the windows, Chicago went on, vast and indifferent, carrying its million private wars, knowing nothing about the one that had just ended in an empty apartment in Ukrainian village where two small boys slept on a couch, and a woman sat in the quiet and let herself feel, finally, the full weight of what the last 24 hours had cost, and the fragile, unexpected fact that everyone she's loved was still breathing. The morning came in gray and slow. Dante woke on the floor beside the couch, with his jacket folded under his head, and no memory of deciding to sleep there. His ribs reminded him immediately and completely of what had happened to them. He lay still for a moment, taking inventory, cheekbone tender and swollen, ribs functional but loud about it, a stiffness in his left shoulder that was new and unwelcome. Nothing broken. Nothing that wouldn't resolve in time. He turned his head. Both boys were still on the couch. Adrian now sprawled sideways with his legs over Nico. Nico on his back with his mouth slightly open. Both of them, in the complete and total unconsciousness of children who had finally exhausted themselves past the point of anxiety. They were breathing. They were warm. They were here. Dante sat up slowly, bracing on one arm, and looked at them for a long moment. He had been in the same room as his sons for less than 12 hours total across his entire life. He understood that fact, with a clarity that was not dramatic, but was very heavy, the specific weight of time that could not be recovered, only acknowledged and moved forward from. He stood. Alara was in the kitchen. He could hear the particular quiet of someone moving carefully to avoid waking others' deliberate footsteps. Cabinet doors eased shut, the soft sound of water running low. He stood in the doorway, and she turned and looked at him without surprise, the way people looked at each other after the kind of night that burned off the social niceties. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were clear, but the skin beneath them told the truth. She'd made coffee, found it somewhere in the cabinets. Solus had stalked, and she held a mug with both hands and looked at him the same way she'd looked at his face last night when she was pressing the towel to his cheek. Direct. Taking inventory. "How are your ribs?" she said. Negotiable. She looked at his face. The cheekbone had darkened overnight, purple, spreading toward his eye in the way those hits always did, worse in the morning than the night before. She didn't comment on it. She poured him coffee without asking. He sat at the small kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat move through his palms. "Marcus is in federal custody," he said. "I know, you told me last night." "I know I told you. I'm saying it again in daylight because I want you to hear it when you're not running on adrenaline." She sat down across from him. "I heard it last night," she said. "I've been sitting here since 4 a.m. hearing it." She paused. "It doesn't feel like relief yet. It just feels like quiet where there used to be noise. And I don't trust the quiet yet. That's reasonable. Is it over? Actually over. The immediate danger is over. The process, the federal side. The legal work that runs for months. But Marcus is done. His people are either in custody or they're running. And running means they're not interested in us." He met her eyes. "You and the boys are safe." She looked at her coffee. "I want to go home," she said, "to my apartment today. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I want." She looked up. "I want to take my boys back to their home and put them in their beds, and I want to make them breakfast tomorrow in our kitchen, and I want to try to make it feel normal. Because they are 4 years old, and they had the worst night of their lives, and the best thing I can do for them right now is normal. Okay, Rourke or whoever doesn't need to be on the door anymore. I'll pull him by this afternoon." She nodded. They sat in the early gray light with their coffee, and the sounds of the boys breathing from the other room, and neither of them rushed toward the conversation that was still waiting. It had been waiting through the entire night, through the Bridgeport warehouse and the Ukrainian village apartment, and the hours of managed quiet, and it would wait a little longer. Nico woke up first. He came into the kitchen in his socks, with his hair pressed flat on one side, and stood in the doorway and looked at both of them at the table. His face was the particular blank of a child who is doing rapid, invisible processing before deciding how to present. "I'm hungry," he said finally. "What do you want?" Alara said. "Cereal." "Check the cabinets. I'll show you which ones." Nico looked at Dante. Dante looked back at him. "Hi," Nico said. "Hi," Dante said. Nico went to the cabinet Alara pointed to and stood on his toes to reach the shelf and found a box of something acceptable and carried it to the table. He sat down in the third chair between them, equidistant, which was either coincidence or 4-year-old instinct, possibly both, and opened the box and examined the contents with the serious expression of someone assessing inventory. "We don't have bowls," he observed. "You can eat it from the box," Dante said. Nico considered this. Then he tilted the box and ate directly from it, watching Dante with those dark eyes over the top of the cardboard. Dante held his gaze. There was an entire conversation happening in it that neither of them had language for yet. But it was happening, and both of them knew it was happening, and neither of them looked away. Adrian woke up 20 minutes later in tears that shifted to confusion to hunger in the span of about 90 seconds, which was, Alara told Dante quietly, completely standard Adrian. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw Dante, and stared with the full-faced openness that was his primary mode of engaging the world. "You have an OE," Adrian said, pointing at Dante's cheekbone. "I do," Dante said. "Does it hurt?" "A little." Adrian considered this with deep seriousness. Then he went to Alara and climbed into her lap and grabbed a fistful of Nico's cereal box, without asking, and sucked some cereal from his fist and watched Dante with enormous eyes. They drove back to North Clark at 10 that morning. The apartment was exactly as Alara had left it. Bags set down in the hallway in the chaos of departure, A bowl from the morning still in the sink, Adrian's coloring book still open on the kitchen table. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at it. Then she stepped in and the boys ran past her, and the apartment absorbed them back immediately, the way familiar spaces did, resetting to the shape of the people who lived there. Dante stood in the hallway. "You can come in," she said, without turning around. He came in. He stood in the kitchen of the apartment, where his sons had been living for 3 years, where the walls had their drawings on them, and the refrigerator had their schedules held by magnets, and the couch had the specific compressed quality of a couch that 2 small boys had spent considerable time jumping on. He looked at all of it. He took it in without comment because there was no comment that would be adequate. "Sit," Alara said. He sat. She made more coffee. The boys disappeared into their room, and he could hear them talking Adrian's running narrative. Nico's occasional responses, the ordinary sound of them re-inhabiting their space, processing the night in the way children process things, by immediately returning to being themselves. Alara put a mug in front of him and sat down. "Now," she said. He looked at her. "The whole truth," she said. "Everything you said you'd give me. I want it now." He gave it to her. All of it in the order it happened, without the editorial softening he'd been unconsciously applying in their previous conversations. The full account of 6 years ago, how the intelligence had come to him, how he'd processed it, what he'd decided and why. The specific sequence of the decision to end their engagement, the meeting with Marcus, the conversation where Marcus had laid out the threat in terms that left what felt like only one available response, the way Dante had turned that response over and found it, in his own analysis, correct. He told her how he had executed the decision, the deliberate coldness of it, the way he had calculated that clean and final was more survivable for her than anything ambiguous. He told her what he had not let himself think about in the 3 years after, what he had locked and not revisited, the discipline of not wondering what she was doing, because wondering would have made the decision unlivable, and he had needed it to be livable. He told her about the photographs appearing on his desk, about the first moment of understanding, seeing her face across the park, that the calculation he'd made 6 years ago had produced consequences he had not been there to see or bear. He told her about Reeves and the 14 months of conversation, about the exit he'd been building without fully knowing its shape yet. He told her that when Marcus had offered him the version of the deal that would have kept the organization intact and required only his silence, he had thought about it for approximately 4 seconds before understanding that it wasn't a real consideration. That the 4 seconds were not him weighing the option, but him watching himself not weigh it. When he finished, the coffee was cold. Alara sat with both hands flat on the table and looked at the middle distance between them. "You made all of those decisions without asking me," she said, not accusation. "Accounting, yes, the original one, and everyone after, yes. Even when you found out about Marcus, even in the last 2 weeks. You told me things. You informed me, but the decisions were yours." He thought about being precise. "The decision to cooperate fully with Reeves, that one I made alone. Yes." He paused. "The decision about where to put the boys last night, the safe house I gave you that choice. Because you needed me to make it. Because it was yours to make." She looked at him. "That's a distinction you're making in retrospect," she said. "Probably," he said. "I'm not going to argue that I got all of this right. I got almost none of it right." He held her eyes. "I made the decisions I knew how to make with the person I was at the time. That person was not, he wasn't good at asking. He was built to decide and execute. It felt like strength. I understand now it was a specific kind of limitation dressed as competence." The apartment was quiet, except for the boys, who had moved from talking to some kind of game that involved intermittent running. "I was pregnant," Alara said, "when you ended it." "I know. You keep saying I know. You say it every time I bring it up, because I don't have anything else. I know. I can't go back. I know what those years were. I know what I wasn't there for." His voice stayed even, but it cost him. "The only thing I can offer you is that I know the full accounting of it, and I'm not going to minimize any line item. And the rest of it is what I do from here." She looked at him for a long time. "The boys are going to have questions," she said, "when they're older, about who you are and what you did and why you weren't there. I know. I'm not going to protect you from those questions. I'm not going to tell them a version that makes it easier. I wouldn't want you to. And I'm not going to tell them a version that's crueler than the truth either, because they deserve the actual truth, which is complicated, not the easy version in either direction." She paused. "But that means you have to be here for it, for the actual conversations, not managed from a distance. I intend to be here. Intending and doing are different things, Dante. You understand that better than most. Yes, he said, I do. She stood and went to the window and looked out at North Clark, at the October Street, at the ordinary Monday morning of it. He watched her back. The set of her shoulders not relaxed, not rigid, somewhere in the complicated middle where most real things lived. I don't forgive you, she said to the window, not yet. Maybe eventually. But not as a gift I'm giving you as something that happens over time if you earn it. She turned around. Is that something you can work with? Yes. It means you show up, consistently. Not when it's convenient and not when the narrative calls for it. Just you show up and you're present and you let the boys know you and you let me trust you incrementally, which be slow and not linear. And sometimes I'll take 3 steps back for every 2 forward. Okay. And if you disappear again, if you make another decision in my absence that restructures my life without asking me, I won't. Don't promise. Just don't do it. She met his eyes. Promises from you have a complicated history. He accepted that. What do you need from me today? He said. Specifically. She thought about it. Go home, she said. Sleep. Let your ribs be what they are. And come back Thursday. For dinner. Early the boys eat at 5:30, because otherwise Adrian becomes a different, worse person. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. Bring something easy. They like things with noodles. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. He stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Alara. He stopped at the kitchen doorway. She was watching him. Thank you. For I know that's an insufficient word for it, but for raising them. For being what they needed, alone for 3 years. For the person you made them into. She held his gaze. They did some of that themselves, she said. He nodded. He went down the hallway. He stopped outside the boys' room. The door was half open. Nico was building something with blocks carefully, methodically, placing each one with the consideration of someone who understood that the structural decisions made early determined what was possible later. Adrian was narrating a story to a stuffed animal that appeared to involve some kind of rescue. Dante stood in the doorway for a moment. Nico looked it up. Are you leaving? Nico said. For now, Dante said. I'm coming back Thursday. Nico considered this with the same inventory expression he'd used on the cereal box. For dinner? He said. For dinner. Adrian likes noodles, Nico said, with the tone of a person conveying essential tactical information. I heard, Dante said. Nico went back to his blocks. Adrian looked up from his stuffed animal. Will you bring the noodles? Yes. The flat kind or the round kind? Which do you prefer? Adrian thought about this with enormous seriousness. Both, he said. Done, Dante said. He left the building. He stood on North Clark in the October morning and let the cold air move through him. And then he walked to his car and drove slowly, across a city that looked the same as it always had from the outside, and was, for him, fundamentally altered in ways he was still taking the measure of. The legal process took 8 months. It was not clean. Nothing about it was clean. There were depositions and negotiations, and moments when the outcome that Reeves had promised seemed to shift and require resecuring. And there were people from the organization who were angry, and people who were frightened, and a period of 3 weeks in December when Dante's lawyer told him to expect indictment, and then it didn't come, and the space between expecting something and not receiving it turned out to be its own particular kind of exhaustion. Marcus Vale was charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and a list of related counts that ran to 4 pages. He did not take a deal. He went to trial and lost, which his lawyer had apparently advised him would happen, and which Marcus had apparently declined to believe. He was sentenced in February of the following year in a courtroom Dante did not attend, because attending would have served nothing except the part of him that wanted to watch, and he'd decided that part of him wasn't worth feeding. Gregor Vasik's network was dismantled over 5 months through a coordinated operation that Reeves described to Dante in their final official conversation as the most significant organized crime disruption the task force had achieved in a decade. Dante's cooperation was material to it. Reeves said so directly, which was the closest thing to acknowledgement Dante received from the federal side, and it was enough. His own exposure resolved in March. Not eliminated, there was a formal agreement, a period of probationary oversight, financial penalties that were substantial and that he paid. No prison. The negotiated outcome held. The organization, the structure his father had built, and he had maintained, and that Marcus had been planning to sell was gone. Not dramatically, not in a single moment, but in the way of things that lose their center, gradually, then faster, then all at once. The people who had comprised it dispersed into other lives. Some of them Dante knew about. Some of them he didn't, Some of them he would probably never know the full accounting of, and he'd made a decision somewhere in the long winter of the legal process that carrying their specific weights was not something he could do and remain functional. He carried his own. Thursday dinners became a consistent fact of the world. Not every Thursday, there were weeks when the legal situation required travel, weeks when Alara had work commitments, a week in January when Nico had a fever that made the apartment quarantine territory. But most Thursdays, Dante showed up with food and sat at the kitchen table in the apartment on North Clark and ate with his sons and let the ordinary accumulate. The ordinary, he found, was not a lesser thing. He'd spent his adult life treating it as the backdrop against which significant events occurred. He understood now that the opposite was true. Nico, over those months, warmed to him in the way Nico did everything, carefully, systematically, with a period of assessment that would have been uncomfortable in an adult, and was, in a 4-year-old, simply recognizable. He asked questions with the directness of someone who had decided early that vague answers were inefficient. He wanted to know where Dante lived, what kind of car he drove, whether he had a dog, why he didn't have a dog, what his job was. The job question was the one Dante had been thinking about since October. He sat at the kitchen table on a Thursday in November, with Nico's eyes on him, those eyes, his own eyes looking back at him, and said, "I'm figuring that out right now." Nico considered this. "That's okay," he said. "Mommy said it's okay to not know things yet. You just have to be trying to find out." Dante looked at Alara across the table. She was looking at her plate. "Your mom's right," Dante said. Adrian's relationship with him was faster and louder and less discriminating, which reflected Adrian's relationship with everything. By November, he was demanding that Dante sit next to him, specifically at dinner, and by December he had developed the habit of showing Dante drawings with the expectation of detailed commentary, and by January he had said, "I love you," with the casualness of a child who felt things completely and saw no reason to manage them. Dante had sat with that for a long time. He'd said it back, carefully, genuinely, in the voice of someone who understood the word's weight and was choosing to use it anyway. Adrian had immediately asked for more noodles. Alara watched all of it. She was not absent from the Thursday dinners. She was present in the specific way of someone who is simultaneously part of something and observing it, who needs to see how it develops before deciding what it means. She was not warm with him, not in the early months. She was fair. She was honest. She corrected him when he defaulted to the old patterns of the decisions made without asking. The management instinct, the way he sometimes still operated from the assumption that he already knew the right answer. "You're doing it again," she said once. In February, when he'd arranged something about the boys' school schedule, without mentioning it to her first. "I know," he said. "Don't know, don't do, yes." It happened again in March, less severely. She said the same thing. He adjusted. The adjusting was not easy. The patterns were old and deep, and they had been survival adaptations once, which made them resistant to the understanding that they were no longer serving their original function. He worked on it the way you worked on anything structural, slowly, with attention, accepting that the work would not be completed. Celeste called him in December. He'd expected it to be difficult, and it was, in the way of conversations that were overdue and honest. She said she had spent 2 months after everything deciding what she actually felt, which had turned out to be more complicated than either anger or relief. She said she'd made peace with the understanding that their relationship had been real, in the ways it was real and not real in the ways it wasn't, and she'd stopped being angry about that distinction. She said she was moving to New York. She said she hoped things worked out with the boys. She did not say she hoped things worked out with Alara, which was its own form of honesty. He thanked her for the information she'd brought to his apartment in October. The Marcus documentation. She'd found it independently, brought it to him as information rather than leverage, when she could have used it differently. "I know," she said. "That mattered," he said. "I know that too," she said. And then, "Goodbye, Dante." He said goodbye. He sat in his apartment after that call, the River North apartment he'd moved out of by January, replaced with something smaller and quieter in Lincoln Square, which was 20 minutes from North Clark, and nobody's idea of a power statement, and he thought about Celeste Marlowe with the full respect of someone who understood that she had navigated an impossible situation, with more integrity than he'd had any right to expect. He hoped New York was good to her. In April, on a Saturday, that was the first genuinely warm Saturday of the year, Alara called and asked if he wanted to come to Lincoln Park. Not the specific path where everything had happened. A different section, further north, with a small open area where children ran, and there was enough space to breathe. She said the boys wanted to feed the ducks, and she had bread going stale, and she thought fresh air was probably good for everyone. He said yes. He arrived to find them already there. Both boys in light jackets, Adrian in mismatched socks that he apparently had opinions about when they matched. He had the bag of bread, and he had strong feelings about distribution rates, and Nico had strong feelings about Adrian's distribution rates, and the disagreement was ongoing. Dante resolved it the way he'd been learning to resolve things, by sitting down at their level, on the ground beside the water, and asking both of them to explain their position, and then finding an actual compromise, which took longer than simply deciding, but which produced two children who felt heard rather than managed. Alara stood a few feet back and watched this. He didn't look at her. He stayed focused on the ducks and the bread negotiation, and the serious business of two 4-year-olds, who were almost 5 now, and who were developing at a rate that still caught him off guard. Sometimes the new words, the new questions, the sudden complexities of their humor. After the bread was gone, Adrian fell asleep on the grass, with the abruptness he fell asleep everywhere, one moment awake and opinionated, and then simply not. Nico sat beside him in the self-appointed protective position he always took when Adrian slept. Dante sat beside Nico. Alara came and sat on Dante's other side. They sat in the April sun, with a sleeping child between them and a watching child beside them, and the park running its ordinary Saturday course around them. "How's the job situation?" Alara said. He'd started consulting work in February, risk assessment, security infrastructure, legitimate and verifiable, drawing on the knowledge he had without the contexts that had once surrounded it. It was not glamorous. It was specific and useful, and it paid. "Stables," he said. "More work than I expected. People pay for what you know." Apparently. She was quiet for a moment. "You look better than you did in October," she said. "That's a low bar. It's still a bar." She looked at the water. "You look like you're sleeping, most nights." The legal stuff. Done, formally, March 30th. She nodded slowly. She'd known that was coming. He'd told her the timing. "How does it feel?" she said. He thought about being precise. "Like putting down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you forgot it had weight," he said. "And then being surprised by how different your hands feel." She looked at him. "That's almost poetic," she said. The same tone she'd used with almost nothing else dry, careful, with the smallest possible warmth underneath. "Don't tell anyone," he said. The something that was almost a smile crossed her face. He'd been watching for it since October and had seen it 5 times. He was keeping count the way you kept count of things that were rare and worth knowing. Nico leaned against Dante's arm, not dramatically, not a statement. Just the lean of a child who has decided that the person beside him is a place to lean. Dante stayed very still and let it happen, and felt it in a way he was not going to describe, even internally, because some things lost something in the describing. "He does that," Alara said quietly. "When he's decided he trusts something." Dante looked at the water. "I know I have a long way to go," he said. Not to Alara specifically. "Just true." "Yes," she said. "Also just true. And I know the distance is mine to cover." "Yes. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Not because of obligation. Not because of what I owe." He paused. "Because this is where I want to be. For whatever that's worth from me right now." She was quiet for a long moment. The park moved around them. A dog ran past. Someone's kite caught the April wind and went up fast, and the child holding it shrieked with delight. "It's worth something," Alara said finally. "I'm not going to tell you how much yet, but it's worth something." He nodded. Adrian woke up and immediately asked about ice cream, with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him a yes. They walked to find ice cream. It took 20 minutes and involved significant disagreement about flavor, and Nico changing his mind twice, and Adrian dropping his before he'd taken 3 bites, and producing tears that resolved in under 90 seconds when Dante gave him the rest of his own. They walked back through the park in the late afternoon. The sun was dropping toward the city line, pulling the light long and gold across the grass. Nico had found a stick and was conducting some kind of ongoing experiment with it. Adrian had taken Alara's hand. The park path stretched ahead of them, ordinary and unhurried. Adrian reached up with his other hand. He found Dante's without looking. Dante closed his hand around the small warm weight of it. He did not look at Alara. She did not look at him. They walked forward together through the April light with the city at their backs and the path ahead, and everything still to be built between them, imperfect and real and entirely, stubbornly alive. The weeks after Lincoln Park moved differently than the weeks before it. Not faster, not easier. Just differently, with a quality of settling that Dante hadn't anticipated and didn't entirely trust at first, because he'd spent too many years understanding that settled things were only things that hadn't been disrupted yet. He was working on that. The therapist he'd started seeing in January, a quiet, precise woman in Lincoln Square, who had the specific gift of asking questions that sounded simple and weren't had a term for it. Hypervigilance. The body's insistence on scanning for threat long after the threat had resolved. The threat resolves, she'd told him in February. The habit doesn't automatically follow. You have to teach it something different. He was teaching it something different. It was slow work. Thursday dinners continued. The first Thursday after Lincoln Park, Nico asked at the table whether Dante was going to keep coming. Not with anxiety, with the tone of someone conducting a logistics assessment. Yes, Dante said. Every Thursday? Most Thursdays. When something comes up, I'll tell you ahead of time. Nico ate a noodle and thought about this. Okay, he said, but you have to tell us before, not the same day. Same day is too late. Agreed, Dante said. Alara said nothing. She was eating and not quite hiding the fact that she found this exchange worth watching. Adrian cries when things change same day, Nico added, with the matter-of-fact delivery of a sibling who has observed this data point extensively. I don't always cry, Adrian said with great dignity. You cried last week when the plan changed, Nico said. That was different. How? Adrian thought about it. I was already ready. Dante looked at Alara. She looked back at him with the expression she'd been gradually allowing, not warm. Exactly, not yet, but present in a way that was becoming its own language. Her eyes said, this is what they're like. Every day. He looked back at his plate so she wouldn't see what was on his face. He wasn't ready for her to see that yet, and he didn't think she was ready to receive it. They were moving in a direction, and the direction was real, but the pace of it was hers to set. And he understood that the understanding itself was the most important thing he could demonstrate. So he ate his noodles and let Nico explain the logic of prior notice, and let Adrian make his case for the contextual validity of same-day tears. And the ordinary evening moved around him like water, and he let it. In May, Alara asked him to come to the boys' preschool showcase. She asked by text, brief and practical. The boys have a thing at school May 14th at 3 p.m. Nico has made something he wants to show you. You should come if you can. He replied, I'll be there. He arrived 8 minutes early and stood outside the school's main room where parents were already clustered and children were running through the specific chaos of an event they'd been building toward for weeks. The room had the smell of construction paper and tempera paint and the particular energy of small people who had been asked to be proud of themselves and had taken to the assignment completely. Alara arrived with 3 minutes to spare. She came through the door and found him immediately. She always found him immediately in rooms. Now he'd noticed, which he read not as warmth, but as the instinct of someone who needed to know where he was before she could orient herself, and she nodded and came to stand beside him. They've been talking about this for 2 weeks, she said. What did Nico make? He wouldn't tell me. He said it was for you to see first. She paused. I don't know if that's sweet or if I should be concerned about the precedent. Probably both, Dante said. She almost smiled. The showcase was loud and slightly chaotic, and involved a great deal of parental crouching to reach child eye level, and Adrian's contribution was a painting that he described as a family, which contained 4 figures of wildly varying proportions, all holding hands, rendered in a color palette that suggested he'd used every available option. He explained each figure with the thoroughness of a curator. That's Mommy, that's me, that's Nico, and he pointed to the 4th figure, the tallest painted in dark blue, that's Daddy. Dante looked at the painting. The figure was tall and dark and had, in the specific impressionistic logic of a 4-year-old's representation, 2 dots for eyes that were larger than the other figure's eyes. Some unconscious accuracy in that. He didn't know what to do with his face, so he kept it as still as he could and crouched down to Adrian's level and said, This is incredible work. And Adrian beamed with the completeness of a child who has received exactly the acknowledgement he required. Nico's piece was across the room. He led Dante to it specifically, with the intent of someone who had planned this moment. It was a small wooden structure built from craft sticks and glue, with a flat base and walls, and what was identifiable as a roof, though the geometry was adventurous. It looked like a house that was making its best effort. I built it, Nico said. I can see that, Dante said. Tell me about it. It's a house, Nico looked at it. We did it in class, but you could build whatever you wanted. Some kids made animals, Lena made a boat, he paused. I made a house because I wanted to make something that stayed in one place. Dante looked at him. Nico looked at the house. I wanted to make something that didn't move. Nico said with the simplicity of a child saying a true thing without knowing how true it was. Dante crouched down. It's very well built, he said. The walls are straight. That's the hard part, keeping the walls straight. Nico nodded seriously. I had to redo the front wall twice. It kept leaning. But you redid it. You have to redo things if they're wrong, Nico said, with the tone of someone stating an obvious principle. Dante held his gaze. Yes, he said, you do. Nico looked at him for a moment with those eyes, the eyes that were his own eyes, that had been watching him since October with the careful patience of a child who had decided to take the time required to know something, before deciding what to feel about it. Are you going to keep coming on Thursdays forever? Nico said. Not logistics this time. Something else underneath it. Dante thought about the right answer. Not the comforting answer. Not the managed answer. The right one. That's what I intend, he said. I can't promise you forever, because nobody can promise that. But I can tell you that I'm not planning to stop, and if something ever comes up, that means I can't be there, I'll tell you before it happens. Not same day. He held the boy's eyes, and I'll always come back. Nico processed this. Okay, he said. He picked up his house carefully with both hands and carried it to show his teacher. Dante stood up. Alara was beside him. He hadn't heard her come over. She'd been watching. That was the right answer, she said quietly. Sure, it was. She looked at Nico across the room. He needed the honest version, not the reassuring version. He always knows the difference. He gets that from you, Dante said. She looked at him sideways. He gets it from somewhere, she said, and let that sit without specifying. They drove back to North Clark in separate cars, as they always did, and he came up for the end of the day the way he sometimes did now on non-Thursdays, when the afternoon allowed it, not often, not presumptively, but with the kind of gradually established permission that didn't require asking every time anymore. The boys had baths, and the baths involved the usual negotiation and the usual quantity of water on the floor, and Dante found himself sitting on the hallway floor, outside the bathroom door, reading a picture book aloud to them through the door while they splashed, which was something that had happened organically once and then become a thing. And he was still getting used to the way things became things with children, the accidental rituals, the way repetition converted novelty into necessity without announcement. After, in the living room, both boys in pajamas, Adrian fell asleep mid-sentence in the way he always did. Nico sat with his house on his lap. He'd carried it home with both hands all the way from school and looked at it. Dad, he said. It was the first time, no preamble, no announcement. Just the word slipping in where it apparently had decided it belonged. Dante went very still. Yeah, he said. Just that. Can we fix the leaning part together sometime? Nico said, examining the front wall. I think the angle is wrong, and I don't want to wreck it trying to do it myself. Yes, Dante said, we can fix it. Nico nodded, satisfied, and set the house carefully on the coffee table, and lay down and was asleep in under 2 minutes. Alara came in from the kitchen. She looked at the room, both boys out, the house on the coffee table, Dante sitting on the floor with his back against the couch because there hadn't been space on it. Did he just, she said quietly. Yeah, Dante said. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she came and sat on the couch behind him, not beside him, just there. In the room. Present, I heard it, she said. Quiet. Not performing the moment, just acknowledging it. I know, he said. They sat in the quiet of the apartment with the boys breathing in sleep, and the May evening coming through the windows and the house on the coffee table with its imperfect walls, leaning slightly, still standing. Neither of them said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. There was still a long road. Dante knew that, and Alara knew that, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. There were conversations still to come that would be hard and necessary, and would require more honesty than either of them would find comfortable. There were the boys' harder questions, still years ahead, about the gaps in the story. There was the slow, non-linear work of trust being rebuilt from a foundation that had been damaged at a structural level. None of that was resolved. But in the May evening, in the apartment on North Clark, with 2 small boys asleep and a house with a leaning wall sitting on the coffee table, and a woman who had survived everything she'd had to survive, sitting quietly in the room behind him, Dante Vescari sat with his back against the couch and let the moment be what it was. Not enough, not yet, but real, entirely, undeniably real. And for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, that felt like the right place to start.